Good morning. I'm former Secretary Edwin Lacierda from Pinoy's Administration.
Masantos siya kabosan at sige namin, naimbag na bigat tayo amin apo, magandang morning Pilipinas! Nani agsalud Braganza po, from President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo sa Administration.
And we are
The Spokes!
Having served as the Socioeconomic Planning Secretary of NEDA under FVR administration, he helped steer the economy at a time when the Philippines was just getting back on its economic stance.
An academic, a columnist, policy critic, he continues to shape national debate on growth, trade, agriculture, and governance. And now we need his wisdom more in this time of economic crisis. Welcome to the Spokes, Secretary Cielito, Habito. Manong Michelle.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. Magandang umaga sa ating mga nanonood at it's an honor to be invited to your program. I've been seeing you once in a while also, and I like the way that you conduct the program in a very informal way.
In a very rowdy way.
I know.
In fact, Manong Michelle, second tanong ko, saan ba galing to? Mukhang hindi naligo eh. Ngayong umaga, diretso na rito.
May pulbos ka nga eh.
Wala sa tenga, sa mukha.
Well, Sec Habito, you grew up in Cabuyao.
I was born in Cabuyao, but I grew up in Los Baños, nearby.
Okay.
So, Laguna ako, Tagalog na Tagalog, at that's where I practically grew up. In fact, to be honest, in my cabinet days, no, when I was the head of NEDA under President Ramos, araw-araw yan, umuwi ako ng Los Baños. So, I'm afraid to say, embarrassed to say, that my carbon footprint has been very large to this date, no? Kasi
You haven't moved to an hybrid vehicle?
Hindi pa.
Hindi pa. Pero kanina may nakasama akong dealer yung asawa niya ng electric vehicle. Sabi ko, mukhang baka daw makatulong siya. Sige. It's time, di ba?
Manong Michelle, you were a summa cum laude graduate of UP Los Baños,
Yes.
College of Agriculture.
Agriculture. I'm proud to say I was first trained in my college degree, first college degree sa agriculture. Literally, doon ako natuto magmaneho ng tractor. At kasi nga, if you take up agriculture, you have 3 courses each. Inabot ko pa yung 5-year course ng UP Los Baños sa BS Agriculture. Kasi
5 years ng BS Agriculture?
May swerte ako sa 5 years, by the way. Kasi ang high school ko, sa Philippine Science High School, na yung first 3 or 4 years niya, 5 years din yung curriculum.
Pisay sa Quezon City.
Yes.
Bumabiyahe rin kayo araw-araw?
Ay, naman. Noong time na yun, hindi dorm, kundi boarding house. Nagsosyo kami mga magkakaklase. Pero in short, 5 taon ako high school, 5 taon din ako nag-college. Dahil ang inabot ko din na curriculum, 5 years for the BS Agriculture. Ang swerte ko, a few years, or 1 or 2 years after I come in, ginagawang 4 years na lang. So, ganun nangyari sa Pisay, ganun din na nangyari sa UP Los Baños, na naging 4 years na lang yung mga sumunod sa amin.
And Nani said that you have a master's degree in Harvard in Australia.
I went to first Australia, where I had a Master of Economics degree, ang tawag nila. Major also in agricultural economics. So hanggang master's, well, my first master's, because I ended up getting another master's later on. Again, agricultural economics. Kaya, well, I guess those who read me in my column notice I write a lot about agriculture kasi nandiyan talaga yung original training ko.
But in terms of macroeconomics po, when you were undersecretary or assistant secretary during the time of President Cory, at syempre naging secretary po kayo during the time of FBR, did your background in agriculture shape your thinking for macroeconomics as far as a country which is primarily at that time very agricultural in nature?
And dagdag ko lang, what is the differentiation from your background as an agricultural economist compared to the other NEDA Director Generals?
Well, I believe, si current,
RC.
Well, Deb na tawag ngayon sa NEDA. RC Balisacan is a very good friend. He's in fact my kumpare. Pareho kami na agriculture ang background. Okay. Of course, he had his undergraduate, I think, in agriculture. I suspect also agricultural economics, a major, sa Mariano Marcos State University, sa Ilocos. No? But he also had his master's degree in UP. Naging estudyante nga namin siya doon sa preparatory program for masteral students.
Oh, he was your student?
In what we call the summer program in economics, na para siyang refresher course before you enter your master's program. But he did it in Diliman. Pero yung summer program sa Los Baños.
How did it influence you being a NEDA Director General?
Well, I would say that, during the time of President Cory Aquino, when I was Assistant Secretary, of course, ang title namin sa NEDA is Assistant Director General, no, at the time, I was in the middle of commenting and researching on agricultural policy issues, particularly coconut and sugar. In fact, yung undergraduate thesis ko was about our top export crops, coconut, sugar, and bananas.
Right.
So talaga nandun ang aking unang pinag-aralan talaga sa ekonomiya natin. But it was only in my masteral and PhD studies in Harvard na nag-general economics na ako. In fact, my field was public finance, which is taxation and government expenditure.
And budget?
Fiscal policy, yeah.
Wow.
And the other one, dalawa yan, international economics or international trade. So
Galing po kayo private sector before you entered government?
no, UP.
I was from the academe to
and UP, as you
government
know,
service.
being the state university, is also government service din yan.
Yes po, yes.
So, halimbawa, mag-abroad ka, talagang ang passport mo pula din. Kukuha ka pa rin ng Malacanang clearance, walang makapagbiyahe.
Ganun ba
In
yun?
short, all UP professors are actually government or public servants, no, let's say. So in short, ganun ang buhay ko din. Ako nasa academe. And yun, marami akong pinag-aralan nga dahil sa mga research ko on the side. Aside from teaching kasi, ang duty mo bilang professor, mag-research din. In fact, sa Los Baños, 3 ang mission yan. Education or instruction, research, saka extension. Yung kailangan ding gamitin mo at ipamahagi mo yung kaalaman mo sa ating mga nangangailangan, lalo na yung farmers natin, obviously.
Tricky question lang ho. How do you compare yourself as a UP graduate at sa mga UP graduate ho ngayon? I'm just curious ho.
Well,
The kind of education that they get today and the kind of education you got during your time. Mas strict ho ba ngayon? Mas liberal ho ba ngayon?
well, siguro ang isang very malimit na sinasite kasi is kung paano ngayon parang nagkaroon tinatawag nilang grade inflation. Na,
What's grade inflation?
kasi nga, parang ang tataasan ng grade ng mga bata ngayon na umaabot ng mahigit 200 ang summa cum laude.
Yun.
At ang cum laude, yung mga honor graduates, 1,000.
Ay, not surprising po kasi sa Lasal, suman cum laude po.
O suman cum latik, no?
Boss, sandali, maghintay ka lang ako, babawian ko ito mamaya. Ang aga-aga ng gugulo.
Pero yun na nga, nung time na yun, siguro mas mahirap. Marami na tinatawag nilang terror professor.
But how many summa cum laudes did you have in your time?
Well, ikaw nagtanong kasi ayoko magyabang. Pero when I graduated in 1975 from UP Los Baños, ako lang ang kaisa isang summa cum laude sa buong UP system.
Wow.
Buong bansa. So lahat ng campus. Kaya nga, kung titingnan mo ngayon, bakit ngayon ay umaabot na ng 200 sa Diliman pa lang yun?
Wow.
So there must be something that changed about the grading. But hindi naman nangangulugan na yung kalidad ng edukasyon nag-iba na rin. No? Sapagkat, siyempre, iba din ang education ngayon. Our education now is informed by neuroscience. Na,
Right.
You didn't even hear the word neuroscience during our time, our student days. Pero in short, talagang, in a way, hindi comparable But iba ang natututunan ng mga bata sa eskwela ngayon, iba nung mga panahon namin.
You know, Nani was so insistent on getting you even before, and we had certain times when, unfortunately, you weren't able to show. But fortuitously and serendipitously, this is the right time to have him because we have a fuel crisis. But before we talk about the present situation, what was the most urgent crisis in FBR's time?
Well, it was obviously the Asian financial crisis towards the end of his administration, because it broke out 1997,
Right.
and of course 1998 was his last year in office.
Right.
So the unfortunate effect of that was that talagang, well, hindi naman sa taking credit for it, but the economic team also worked very well. We had very good leadership. Our economy was actually on a roll during the time of President Ramos.
Question lang ho, nakakaya kasi uncle ko po, but I have to ask this question. Is it true, o propaganda nyo lang ho ng panahon ni FBR, na yung Pilipinas, yung economy niya, was the least damaged regarding the Asian crisis?
Totoo yan, because the numbers will speak for themselves. Nung tumama yung Asian financial crisis, if I recall right, our own GDP growth at the worst of it, less than -1 ang ibinaba. Samantalang yung mga neighbors natin, Thailand, I think had -12, Indonesia had -15, double-digit negatives. And yet we barely shrank during that
How
time.
did you manage that?
Well, the usual explanation we had at that time. At that time, ang explanation namin, we already had practice.
What do you
Because we
mean?
had our own crisis.
Okay.
Na, of course, homegrown atin lang. After the Aquino assassination in the early 80s. And that was a time na nagkaroon din nung tawag din, tequila crisis, yung Mexico naman na financial crisis.
Yes,
But that crisis we had in 1983 thereabouts, of course, led to a deep recession. And tayo lang yon kasi homegrown eh. So sabi nila, our banks, for example, realized the kind of prudential limits they should also impose on themselves. So by the time nag-hit yung financial crisis ng Asia-wide, our banks were more resilient, were more prepared kasi ayaw na nila maulit yung nangyari sa kanila noong early 1983, 84.
But we also came from a power crisis.
Yes.
During the period of FBR, 8 hours.
Sorry.
Minana ni FBR.
I remember kasi nag-aaral kami ng law school, we're taking the bar. 89 yun eh, may power crisis doon eh. That's why I remember that. Then when we move on to your time, in FVR's time, I was already a lawyer. A lot of foreign investors were coming in.
Yes.
To invest. So that's another problem that...
But of course, just before FVR, alam niyo naman, ang problema natin precisely kakulangan ng power.
Right.
Because during the early months of FVR's term, we were having 12-hour brownouts because we simply had to ration electric power. And of course, everybody, many people understand the reason. Kasi apparently, with all due respect to former President Aquino, during her term, there was no new investment in any power capacity.
Barges po ata.
Tapos, kinancel yung yung Bataan Nuclear Power Plant. Not that I don't agree with that. I agree with that canceling. Kaya lang, hindi nagkaroon ng replacement for what would have been a major addition to our power capacity. So by the time we got to the 1990s, 1992, when President Ramos assumed office, we really had much less power capacity than what the demand really was already.
Ito na po yung gante, Manong Shell, kay Sec Lacierda. Kaya siya pumasa ng bar exam kasi brown out.
Hindi makita ng bar exam niya yung mga sagot ko. Tinamad mag-grade.
Nag-warning shot ako, ha?
Pero yun ang talagang problema noon. Energy in general, kasi pati oil, no?
Right.
In fact, napapag-usapan nga itong ngayon, no? Yung regulasyon ng oil industry.
Yes, sir.
One of the most prominent things I remember upon entering government in 1990, ang laki ng deficit ng gobyerno natin. At ang pinakamalaking dahilan ay yung Oil Price Stabilization Fund.
Yes.
Na talagang malaking deficit yon na kinakarga ng gobyerno, kinakarga ng taxpayers. No?
Sinasubsidize, in other words,
Kasi,
yung presyo, kinukontrol.
Yeah, ang prinsipyo naman ng OPSF, na by the way, maraming gusto ibalik daw yon pero hindi nila nare-realize kung mas lalong lumaki problema
Because
natin.
Thailand meron ganun, may price stabilization fund din sila eh.
Yeah, pero
similar but not entirely.
Depende kasi kung sino nagmamaneho ng fund na yan.
Correct.
Alam niyo nangyari sa atin, ang prinsipyo, madala, ika nga, no? Pag mababa ang presyo ng langis sa world market, that's the time na, sige, presyohan natin ng mas mataas, may naiipon tayong pondo sa difference. No? Pag the time na tumaas naman, meron tayo ngayong pampuno, hindi natin kailangan taasan masyado yung presyo natin. So, yun ang basic principle nun, para mas maging stable ang presyo. Ang problema, pagdating na ng mga politiko, na pagdating na nung tumaas na yung presyo, ayaw nilang itaas yung presyo, nalugi. And in others, na-deplete na yung pondo na yun. Na utang na ang nangyari, ayaw pa rin itaas ang presyo ng langis.
Grabe ang leakages doon at that time, that fund.
Question lang po. Yung bang oil reserves natin nung panahon na yon were in the hands of government?
I don't think so. Wala namang there was never any government-controlled oil
at the time. Petron
well,
ba? Or
only to that extent, no, na
Yes, po.
gobyerno may-ari ng Petron.
Yes,
so yun, kung ano yung naka-store ng Petron,
Yun
You
po
can
yung
consider that to be a government-controlled reserve.
compared to today na nasa hawak po ng private sector.
Private sector talaga ang
And it will only last about 40, 50 days.
Well, yun ang sabi nila sa supposed na inventory nila. No?
There was a oil deregulation law. Did it happen during your time or subsequent?
During Ramos's time, yeah.
Yes, that was the first oil deregulation, but there were some questions on so some people, some oil companies were taking advantage of the tariff. Parang yung mga small companies could not enter because there was a distinct advantage for the bigger ones. That's why it had to be, a case was filed in the Supreme Court, and now the present law is the full deregulation now.
That's right.
That we
Kaya
have.
nga nakapasok yung mga yung mga maliliit na
Let me ask you, sir. We have a current geopolitical price spike. Do you see this as temporary, and do you see this also as a structural defect in our Philippine energy crisis by going full deregulation?
I don't think so. I think, as a basic principle, any commodity must really be priced according to actual cost. No? I mean, actual cost of obtaining it, not necessarily the cost of producing it, which can be something very different. Yeah. Pero halimbawa, if the cost of acquiring oil for the Philippines, especially for our refineries, and then, kasi yung refinery natin, kulang din ang capacity 35% lang ang kaya natin.
Pero I know there's only 1 or 2 na lang natitira.
Yeah, kasi nag-aalisan yung mga dating malalaki. No?
Right.
And we actually import more of our petroleum requirements as refined from our neighbors, Korea, China, Malaysia, Thailand, I believe. So, ang problema nga natin is that kung pepresyohan mo yan na para medyo artificial ang presyo, tulad nung nangyari nung panahon ng Oil Price Stabilization Fund. And then when that decision went to adjust the domestic market price, it's very politicized. What our experience shows how it can actually be worse.
Even if on a temporary basis lang, let's say government intervention. Of course, the law doesn't allow government intervention, but given the concern right now is like what Nani was saying, may hinimatay na kotse sa gas station. Sobrang taas. So, do you think...
Nakita ko yung picture niya, nakabaliktad yung kotse.
Tapos si Eileen mag-station of the cross sa 14 na
station ng gasolina.
But if it's a temporary, do you think even on a temporary basis, you do not agree that government, if allowed to, can intervene and determine the prices?
No, pwede naman. Especially nga pag temporary, Kasi nga, if it's temporary, and I think there's good reason to believe, hopefully, that it will not really last that much longer. Of course, we all know that's a big if, depende kung magkasundo na finally ang Amerika, Israel, at saka ang Iran. But if it's not going to last indefinitely into the future, then fine. Pwede namang matulungan natin. Kumbaga, bigyan natin ng pantawid itong ating mga tsuper, halimbawa, the jeepney drivers. Because, as you know, domino effect yan. No? If the price for gasoline or diesel that our drivers have to pay for is higher, then naturally you have to allow them to raise their fare. Pag tumaas ang pamasahe, then cost of transport in general goes up. So lahat ng bagay maapektuhan. No? Kasi
question lang po.
Talagang magre-ripple out the economy yung pagtaas ng presyo. Ayaw natin mangyari. So doon mo palang pigilin sa presyo pa lang ng gasolina o presyo pa lang ng pamasahe.
Galing po tayong tatlo sa kabinete, di ba? And every time there's a crisis, ang sinasabi po ng gobyerno sa taong bayan, magsakripisyo tayo. Kailan ba magsasakripisyo naman yung gobyerno para sa tao? At saka, ang tanong ko po, yung bang is suspending the excise tax, is that the right move? Kasi it will also favor the importers of gasoline. Di ba? And will that automatically reduce the cost of gasoline?
Well, pwede naman sana. Actually, as they always say, it depends. Depende nga kung ano yung financial situation ng gobyerno natin ngayon. Ang tanong talaga, can government afford it?
Yes,
given the cost it has to incur.
Yes.
Kasi alam mo na, pag nag-subsidize ka, para mo sinabing, sige, hindi muna kami mangongolekta ng malaking buwis yan. Yung taxes na, excise tax ng ating mga petroleum products is one of the biggest sources of revenue ng ating gobyerno. Pag yan ay bigla mong sinabing mong, sige, hindi na muna natin kolektahin, alang-alang sa taong bayan so that they'll have to pay less for their petroleum products. Ang kapalit niyan, syempre, is that, okay, kukunti din ng pondo ng gobyerno. The only way the government can sustain its spending to be able to give the usual services, the usual investment in infrastructure,
Will also suffer.
is to either raise taxes,
Yes,
so sino tatamaan, tayo din lahat,
Oh.
or to borrow more, take more foreign loans. And ngayon, alam naman yun, narinig yun siguro, 18 trillion na
Ang utang mo natin.
national debt ng Pilipinas. This is the public debt, no? Ang ibig sabihin yan, patuloy na babayaran yan ng gobyerno. At
That's from 13 trillion po ata na iniwan po ni Pangulong Duterte.
Well,
At 5 trillion na po ata yun.
malaki
Plus
talaga
5
ang
trillion.
May
niya.
follow-up ako dyan, pero just a question. During the annual gathering of former NEDA officials recently, you have discussed that you are to blame for the massive corruption that you are experiencing right now. But before you give your explanation,
Ba't natin
the
imbita to?
host will return after this short break. Di ba?
Ba't natin The Spokes is back, still with former NEDA Secretary Manong Habito. Our hanging question po, how would you explain why you said that it is your fault kung bakit may massive corruption ho ngayon?
Actually,
Dun sa
clarification,
Pilipinas.
hindi ako nagsabi. nagkaroon ng ano kasi ng reunion ng mga dating ng official ng NEDA.
Informal gathering to.
Informal yan. We do that every year now because there's a group called the NEDA Alumni Association. No? Ngayon, yung last time kami nag-meet, last February, inimbita nila na magkaroon ng panel discussion. 3 former leader nga nila. Si former Secretary Philip Medalla, tapos si Dante Canlas, naging sa panahon ni GMA naman.
Si Erap naman, si
Philip
Medalla.
Medalla, si Erap. In fact, si Philip Medalla yung immediately naging successor ko. Sa kanya ko pinasa yung bandera ng NEDA nung matapos yung term President Ramos. Tapos ako yung pangatlo.
Mabuti na-clarify nyo kasi nagtatanong, ba't natin ito kinuha ang guest?
Hindi, pero isa pa, pabiro sinabi yun ni Philip Medalla.
Okay.
Kasi ganito ang ibig niya sabihin. Sabi niya, alam niyo, kaya maraming korupsyon ngayon, it's our fault because we made the government so good at raising revenues. Ngayon, mas marami nang nanakawin. yun ang kanyang sinabing pabiro. Kaya sinasabi niya, kasalanan natin eh. Pinagbuti natin ang trabaho natin eh. Kaya ngayon, mas maraming nanakawin. That was what he really was saying.
Pero panahon kahit kukunti pa ng gobyerno, marami pa rin magnanakaw eh.
Well,
Utang politiko talaga ito.
Sorry you have a what, 16 trillion debt? Di
18
ba? 18 trillion.
Lumagpas na daw ng
You have a
18.
budget of 6.3 trillion. Ang missing na pera, 1.3, 1.7 trillion. Sus Maria Santissimo.
But until this oil crisis came about or the flood control came about, our debt to GDP was still good, di ba? There's no...
Oh yeah, actually
good.
kasi naibaba na natin ang debt to GDP ratio natin below 60. Na yun ang kino-consider nila na safe threshold.
Right.
Ngayon, lumampas na naman tayo nasa 63 as of the last time I checked, no. Pero we were already beginning to pat ourselves in the back na okay, now it's down to under 60%. We're okay because mind you, ang America, United States, ang kanilang debt to GDP ratio mahigit 100%,
Yes.
no? Kahit yata Singapore parang ang isip ko pala yung export to GDP nila 200%. Pero maraming mga bansang mayayaman na actually mas malaki. Pero sa mga bansang hirap tulad natin, 60 typically ang tinatawag na threshold.
We were talking about subsidies a while ago. From an economist point of view, the finance secretary should have a different view. But I want to know from your point of view, because the oil price is happening every week, so
Yes.
the intensity and the speed about the prices going up is so fast that my concern was, shouldn't we give a broad subsidy rather than a targeted subsidy? Because, like, we are car owners, and if you're not using a hybrid, your cost for your gasolines will be high. Shouldn't we? And because the speed of the increase is every week, and we don't know how long this war will last. So, as an economist, and to allay the fears and to prevent, as Nani told me before, widespread chaos, shouldn't we go for a broad subsidy, or you would still insist on a target subsidy, which will take some time to identify the database for the targeted sectors?
Hindi kasi as a general principle, mas maganda na yung yung ang subsidy talaga naka-target doon sa nangangailangan.
Correct.
Because if you have a broad subsidy that even the rich will benefit from, then there will be some kind of inefficiency there. In short, in principle, you would like the people who use that commodity or service, if it's a case of a service, the ones for them to be the ones to pay for the higher cost. Hindi yung parang, well, I remember one example given before nung nagreklamo sila, tinaas daw yung pamasahe do sa MRT, sa EDSA.
Right.
No? Sabi nila, bakit itinaas nila yung bakit hindi na lang gobyerno i-subsidize na lang ng gobyerno? Ang ibig kasi sabihin nun, everybody who pays taxes, whether you're from Metro Manila, from Northern Luzon or Mindanao, tumutulong bayaran yung MRT na. So, siyempre, when you think about it, dapat talaga magbayad nun yung mga talaga sumasakay. Hindi yung lahat ng taong bayan isa-subsidize din itong mga So, yun ang prinsipyo nun.
I'm curious lang ho, beyond subsidy ho kasi, you're technically an agriculturist. Technically, ano?
And he's an agricultural advocate.
So, ang problema ba ng agriculture natin is it the supply chain or including the value chain? Kasi ang dami hong traders in between. My count is 9. So, from the farm gate to the market, siyam ho yung
Maraming
nakikialam sa
dinadaanan.
gitna ho eh.
Totoo
So, in crisis like this, how should the government intervene?
Siguro makikita natin sa nangyari nung COVID, nung pandemic eh.
Yes,
na nung time na yon, at least sa amin sa Los Baños, I'm sure sa Metro Manila, maraming gano'n na makakabili ka ng mga gulay mo sa mga taong nagdadala na mismo sa sa tapat ng bahay mo, no? Of course, iba pa yung community pantry na talagang sharing mechanism. Pero ang ibig kong ang tinutukoy ko kasi dito, when people started planting in their own backyards and then selling it to their neighbors, then you had a much shorter value chain, no?
Yes, po.
Ngayon, pag yung mga gulay na galing pa sa Benguet, tapos
Upland
bababa
vegetables,
ng Divisoria, mula Divisoria, pupunta pa sa iba-ibang probinsya sa paligid ng Manila. So there is a lot of, additional cost involved in that kind of supply chain. Kaya nga sabi nung isang advocate ng urban agriculture, na pwede naman daw magtanim kahit na sa city, with vertical structures.
Hydroponics, that's called hydroponics.
Hydroponics. Pero meron ding may lupa. Pero parang meron siyang ginawa structure na made out of metal na iba-ibang layer. Umiikot na lang kung gusto mong pababain yung nasa taas. Gano'n. Pero in short, occupying a small area, you can grow a lot. And sabi niya, of course, mukhang mahal, no?
Yeah.
Pero sabi niya, yung masasave mo naman sa transport cost mula sa Baguio, mula sa Benguet, parang nababalance out. So in other words, it makes it worthwhile to actually do that.
That also includes aquaponics, growing fish.
Aquaponics, yan.
And vegetable at the same time.
Kasi nga, yung natawag na hydroponics, is, walang soil, walang lupa. Nakakita halimbawa ko sa Singapore, nung malaking, you can call it a factory ng lettuce. No?
Yes, po.
And the way it is, nakahang yung lettuce plant, nakaspread yung ugat, tapos in-spray lang ng tubig sa ilalim. Walang lupa. Pero ang ganda, ang beberde ng mga gulay. So that's the kind of thing that can be done even without without large pieces of land to plant on.
Abnormal ho kasi, nabubulok yung sibuyas sa probinsya. 800 pesos yung sibuyas sa Manila. At the time.
Yes.
There was a time, umabot na kayo. In fact, 1,200 nga po, di ba? Tapos rampant pa yung smuggling. So, technically, pag may smuggling, dapat bumaba yung presyo eh. Or even importation for that matter. And yet, mataas pa rin yung presyo ng sibuyas. So, at the expense of our farmers yun, our producers. So, anong government intervention ang kailangan? Para maayos natin yung supply chain.
Yung dinidescribe nyo kasing sitwasyon na yun, talaga ang dahilan dyan, may mga kumokontrol ng supply.
Cartel.
Yung tinatawag nilang cartel. No? Sila yung, kahit maraming sibuyas, kung itinatago halimbawa ang marami, then you can create an artificial shortage. Na obviously, yun ang magpapataas ng presyo. Yun naman sa sibuyas, halimbawa, isa pang naging malaking problema dyan, yung mismong, again, the value chain, cold storage. Kasi madaling mabulok ang sibuyas. So, kailangan dyan, para magtagal, meron kang cold storage, yung mga refrigerated na warehouse talaga.
And there are investments now in cold storage.
So, ngayon, yun ang nakikita ng ating gobyerno na kailangan gawin na yan ang nagkulang. Kasi, farm-to-market roads, laging nababanggit yan. Kaya lang alam niyo naman, naging biro pa dyan, farm-to-pocket roads ang karamihan dyan.
Farm to nowhere pa eh.
Farm to nowhere.
Pero yung yung iba pa is, of course, post-harvest facilities. Pero yung nakalimutan nila sa post-harvest, yung mga cold storage, yung mga magpapalamig, yung mga perishable natin na mga produkto, lalo na gulay. No? So yun ang ngayon na-realize natin, yung pala, kung yun ang naging dahilan, naging mahal ang sibuyas at nabubulok pa nga eh. Kaya nagkulang ang supply. Kasi sa dami naman sa ibang lugar na hindi naman nadala sa mga lugar na kailangan siya, of course, doon sa mga walang supply, doon tumataas ng masyado.
As a major policy, yung rice tariff, does it favor farmers or does it favor consumers?
Well, obviously, it's meant to favor consumers kasi ang theory dyan is kung mas mura ang imports, then bababa dapat ang presyo ng bigas. No? Again, hindi nangyari tulad ng ideal sana sapagkat meron nga ng mga nagko-control ng supply lalo na ng mga nakakapasok na imports.
So I just want to compare sino mas malaking kasalanan, yung cartel o yung mga politikong magnanakaw?
Pareho sila siguro.
I remember in the Aquino cabinet, one secretary, agriculture secretary, sabi niya, we can do rice self-sufficiency. And I remember RC said, that's not possible, that's not doable. And so the suggestion was, let's import rice lang where the cost of rice is cheaper than the cost of producing rice here. Is that a viable, still a viable option for us? But because of the parang nangyayari, hindi bumababa masyado ang presyo ng rice.
Well, totoo yun na napipinsala ang mga magsasaka natin. Pero, ang lagi kong sinasabing analogy dyan, para kasing rifle versus shotgun solution eh. Gusto mong tulungan ng mga farmers natin, huwag mong gamiting tulong yung makakapinsala sa mas nakararami. And that is what happens when you block the importation of rice. Alam niyo, nangyari sa ating bigas, doble ang presyo sa Pilipinas kumpara sa ating mga neighbors. Because we have protected our market by shielding off competition. Nawala yung pressure na taasan ng productivity. So, kumbaga, mga nakaraan, parang naging tamad ang ating gobyerno na tumulong ng tamang tulong. Ang tamang tulong kasi is bigyan mo ng kakayahan yung farmers na makipagtapatan to sa mga Thai, Vietnamese farmers.
I have a question for you. The comparison with us in Thailand, Vietnam is that they have a distinct advantage because they have a huge Mekong River to irrigate, while we don't have, maybe perhaps central Luzon lang. And so you have to create irrigation ditches, which are very, very expensive. So how can you compare our prices when our cost of production and cost of building this is much more expensive than a Mekong River, which is a natural irrigation?
Well, that's the argument that Secretary R.C. Balisacan had been trying to make, I'm sure, during that time of President Pinoy, no? Because, unang-una, huwag ka na mag-ambisyon na 100% ng ating bigas na kailangan ay tayo lang ang gagawa. Yun ang nagpataas ng presyo natin. Meron tayong mga areas in the country, yun ding may magandang mga river delta. Like, along sa Central Luzon, may Pampanga River. Sa Iloilo, yung Panay River dyan. Sa Mindanao, kung nasaan yung malalaking river natin doon ang cost of production ng palay, may kukumpare mo sa cost of production sa Thailand, Cambodia. Kasi tulad ng Mekong River, na may malaking river delta, yun ang malaking tulong sa pagpapababa ng cost of production. Pero kung pipilitin mo pa rin, for the sake of rice self-sufficiency, 100%, na mag-grow ng palay sa mga totally unsuitable areas, siyempre, on the average nationwide, mas malaki ang cost ng palay natin. So, ang gusto ko ikwento, yung Malaysia, na-realize nila yan, 1960s pa, hindi na sila nag-ambisyon ng 100%. Sabi nila, we will stop at 65%. Kasi yung 35%, yung perang kailangan para magawa yung remaining 35%, na-realize nila, mas maganda doon na lang ating gastusin sa ikayayaman ng farmers. Oil palm at saka rubber.
Technology. At saka
these are high value commodities.
In other words, high value crops,
Yes, po.
kontento na sila na i-import nila yung kakulangan na 35%. So, all throughout 10 Malaysia development plans, nakasaad sa kanila yon. Na ang kanilang ambisyon lang is ang ma-produce nilang sarili nila is 65. Nung naging magaling na sila, umabot na itaas na nila ng 85 kasi they became very good at raising productivity of their farmers. Kasi yung competition, pinairan nila yung competition.
Follow-up question lang po, no? Is it fair to say that we are a net importer of basic commodities, basic needs, rather than a net exporter of basic of commodities, di ba, that other countries need. At will there ever be a time na tayo naman ang maging major exporter of some commodities, di ba, rather than just being net importers to help our farmers?
Yes, in fact, naging totoo talaga yan na lumaki ang ating imports, no, especially of food, no.
Yes, sir.
And just talk about rice in particular, our staple food. Our imports grew through the years as our cost of production diverged from the cost of production in our neighbors, precisely because of that artificial environment you created na walang kompetisyon.
Let's go back to the present crisis. What if the Middle East conflict remains unresolved for a longer period of time? What will happen to our economy? But before you answer that, let's pause. We'll return after the short break. And the spokes is back, still with sexual Habito. Our hanging question a while ago was what if the Middle East conflict continues to remain unresolved for a longer period of time? What are the possible scenarios that should be anticipating?
Well, ang talagang nakakatakot yung pagkain, kakulangan ng pagkain. Food shortages can very well happen. Number one, because fertilizers are also derived from petroleum.
Right.
So when petroleum prices go up, fertilizer prices go up as well. No? And that's the reason why maybe we have to really think more and look more towards the non-petroleum-based fertilizers. Madami tayong mga magagaling na scientists. In fact, UP Los Baños is talking about this nitrogen fixing, yung tag nila, Bio-N, na pag nilagay mo sa lupa, yung mga bakterya sa lupa mismo, sila ang gumagawa ng nitrogen. Hindi nitrogen yung nilagay mo. Yung inoculum ng bakterya na pag lumago yung bakterya, dadami yung nitrogen sa lupa. Yan ang mga scientific ways
How about
of doing
fuel
it.
shortage? You're not concerned with fuel shortage?
Well,
do you believe that we have a continuous supply of fuel?
Well, it's hard to say, no? Kasi sino ba talaga nakakaalam ng exact data dyan. Pero according to the Department of Energy, ang naiulat nila recently, 45 days ba ang atin daw natitirang reserba? Actually, sa sandali yun, di ba? Sa kalahating buwan lang yun. Pero pag talagang wala nang ibang pumasok, magkakaproblema talaga tayo. Aabot tayo sa pagrarasyon. Yung pagpila. Remember the 1970s petroleum crisis?
Oil embargo.
During the oil embargo, and there literally was no oil available, no gasoline available in the gas pumps. And the very limited quantity had to be rationed. No? 5 liters lang kayo sa bawat karga, gano'n. No? At ang haba, kilometro ang pila ng kotse na para lang makabili. But actually, many are saying, maaari tayong bumalik doon kung talagang umabot sa gano'n na hindi tayo makakuha ng petrolyo.
If you were in government right now, sorry, Nani.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you're in government right now, what would be your economic prescriptions as to stem the tide of whatever shortages that we will have?
Well, it's less economic than political. Siguro talagang dapat gawin ginagawa na nga ni President Bongbong Marcos ngayon, no, na talagang humahanap ng mga friendly nations kung saan pwede tayong bumili diretso ng langis kung meron sila, no.
Bilateral.
Ang bilateral deals na, no. Naalala ko halimbawa ng panahon ni Marcos Sr., ang kanyang secret weapon noon, si First Lady Imelda Marcos, pinadala kay Gaddafi sa Libya, nakakuha ng allocation din ng malaki during that oil crisis at the time. I guess that's the way to do it now. You really have to look at bilateral deals to be able to assure our access to the supply. Kasi pag iaasa mo sa sa open market, constricted ngayon sinara nga yung Strait of Hormuz kung saan dumadaan ang 1/5 of all the petroleum in the world, dumadaan doon. Pag napigil mo, 1/5, malaki yun. No? So this is the kind of more of statesmanship na yan.
You think also subsidies will will continue because of the unpredictability of this war?
Actually kasi pag if I don't know, ongoing na ba na may subsidy na pag sinubsidize mo nga halimbawa, so meron na of course targeted naman to sa transport sector. Para nga hindi magka-domino effect na tumaas ang pamasahe, tumaas ang cost of transport. So kayang manatili yan kung hindi tatagal. Pero aabot sa punto pag patuloy itong crisis na ito sa Middle East na mauubos din yung pondo ng gobyerno o mapipilitang umutang na malaki.
What then?
Then you really, and unfortunately, kung talagang walang paraan na to raise the money to be able to subsidize, then really the government will have to let the prices follow the market.
But, sorry, question lang ko. So, in this crisis, anong sektor talaga ng Pilipinas ang tinatamaan ho ng matindi? Is it the agricultural sector, the manufacturing sector, o lahat ho ng sektor?
Palagay ko across the board yan.
Across the board ang tama.
Kasi ang cost of fuel, because the way it affects the cost of transport, talagang pangkalahatan epekto niya. Kasi lahat ng produkto ay tinatransport. Lalo na in an archipelagic country like the Philippines, na 7,000 island tayo. So para lang ma-transport yung mga production mo from one place to another, talagang gagamit ka ng petroleum.
Ano mo?
Kasama sa presyong binabayad lahat yun.
There was a time nagka-crisis ho yung Thailand eh. And the king called upon the people to help government. So, ang dami nag-donate ng gold.
Correct. Mga kwintas nila, whatever.
Do you see that ever happening in the Philippines?
Ay, yun nga ang ano.
The false state nila,
Totoo yun. Nangyari sa Thailand, nangyari daw sa Korea.
Yes po.
During the financial crisis,
Right.
yung Asian financial crisis. Sabi ng isang pumupula sa mga Pilipino na meron isang naging viral na Korean posting, sabi niya gano'n, kulang daw tayo ng pagmamahal sa bayan. Kasi hindi daw mangyayari sa Pilipinas yun eh.
In the alternative, your predecessor, Cielito said, let's impose a wealth tax on the billionaires. Do you agree with that?
Well, that's a popular...
Ha?
Wawalo.
Anong wawalo?
Wawalang bilyonaryo lang dito ata. 12
Hindi,
lang.
marami tayo.
Marami naman.
Marami hindi nagtatago lang.
Sino?
Secret.
Siyempre yan ang appealing shall we say idea para sa marami kasi
But is that doable?
totoo.
Political will yun,
Political will. Tama si Nani na kung talagang determinado, if our leaders are determined to really kumbaga, let those who are comfortable in life assume a bigger burden.
But
It can happen.
If you agree with Cielito, would you know that more or less, we just mentioned it's a wealth tax, but what is the substance behind the wealth tax? Ano bang i-impose mo talagang tax? Tax on their
Yun ang
assets?
problema dyan. Kasi pag sinabi mong wealth tax, usually iniisip dyan, yung mga, at one time it was proposed na any second, third, fourth house owned by the same family, bubuwisan mo
Si
na
Nani,
malaki.
marami to eh.
Basta gano'n, yung obvious na unnecessary na luxury. Kaya lang, pag titingnan mo, kukunti talaga yan. You cannot really raise that much.
Ako po, Manong, aaminin ko, marami akong bahay. Pero dapat umamin to, na marami siyang ibinabahay.
Na pusa at aso.
Dahil yun na nga, ang question, gaanong karami ang mere-raise mo sa ganun tax?
By the way, the Malampaya Fund was used, 20 billion. Is that a proper way of helping?
Well, in times like this, kung meron kang pondong ganyan, siyempre, viable source of financing subsidies yung mga ganyan.
So
as long as hindi maging pangmatagalan, kasi yun ang problema nga eh, dahil may sariling purpose yung yung pondo na yun eh.
Correct. So you're looking already at potential future sources of revenue, sources of money to subsidize or fund.
Well, yun na nga. We have to look at our tax system, how to make it such na hindi naman yung pinakamahihirap ang napaparusahan ng mas matataas na buwis. In fact, that's the problem with the Philippine tax system. Ang tawag nila regressive. Na mas mabigat ang tama sa mas mahihirap yung ating tax system. Kasi ang tax system natin nagdedepende sa value-added tax, yung tawag nila indirect tax na binabayad tuwing bumibili ka ng produkto. So lahat yon, lahat ng Pilipino bumibili eh. Kaya lang, as a percent of your income, mas malaking porsyento na income yung binayad mong buwis kung mas mahirap ka.
Correct, tama.
Kasi malaki ang income ng mayayaman, hindi naman lahat ginagastos eh.
Tanong mo na yung tough question.
No.
So, sorry, as a non-oil producing country, di ba? At nagkaroon ng krisis sa langis, may tama po kaagad sa atin eh.
Of course.
As a former NEDA director, what would be your short-term, medium-term, long-term agenda para itong Pilipinas naman magkaroon ng stability despite these price shocks? Like for example, yung susunod na Pangulo dito sa atin, because ilang taon na lang to?
President Braganza.
Vice President Lacierda. Senator Ray Marpil.
Well, yun ang advantage natin sa Pilipinas, no? Marami tayong potential sources of alternative energy. Hindi ko tinutukoy necessarily yung solar or wind. Geothermal at hydropower pa lang. Mayaman tayo dyan. In fact, it's always been said, we are one of the top geothermal power producers in the world in terms of yung
and those are base load pa.
Yung damage natin. So, ngayon, ang alam ko, in fact, disclosure, I was in the board of one of those companies that actually are into renewable power, na hydro at geothermal. Ay, malaking portion ng kanilang na-generate electricity. At they're now investing more into being able to get more capacity from geothermal and from hydropower. Yun, talagang likas na atin, energy security-wise, mas magandang talagang let's invest more in that kind of energy.
So, ang sinasabi niyo po, if we are not dependent with other countries, may sarili tayong kuryente, we can stabilize yung production cost probably.
Yes.
Then we can have mas murang pagkain and other services. That's what you're saying.
Let's talk about executive action. If you were in the cabinet, what would you advise President Marcos how to handle the economy until 2028?
Well, ang lagi kong binabalikan dyan, what I call the backbone of our economy, agriculture. Talagang in fact, I could even argue na lahat ng crisis natin ngayon, lalo sa edukasyon, no? We are always talking about how kulelat ang mga Pilipino sa mga PISA, yung mga international assessment ng mga estudyante. Bakit? Well, hindi lang dahil sa kakulangan ng schools, textbooks, teachers. It's actually because 1 out of 3, or maybe now 1 out of 4 of our youngest children are so malnourished.
Yes.
Sabi nga nila, stunted, ang pinaka-visible manifestation. Pero ang problema doon, hindi yung pagkabansot nila eh. Yung utak nila, malnourished din, kaya underdeveloped. At alam nyo ba na sa isang tao, ang development ng utak, 90% happens before age 5.
Yes po.
Pag ang bata ay malnourished, matindi ang malnourishment at age 5, damage for life na siya eh. Hindi mo nang mababawi. So, sabihin, kaya tayo maraming problema sa mahihina ang performance sa eskwela is hindi lang dahil sa mga teachers, textbooks, buildings natin, pati na yung kakayahan nilang matuto.
Question
dahil
po,
dito.
ang solusyon ng mga politiko natin sa agricultural problem, farm-to-market road.
Kasi nga, nagiging farm-to-pocket road kalimitan eh.
It's 54 billion. So, that money should be more than enough to finance irrigation systems, hydro, and yet, hindi ko nangyayari yun eh. So, what's wrong?
I guess ang kailangan natin talaga ay tighter controls at lalo na ang mga taong bayan na mismo ang dapat magbantay. Ang magandang nangyayari ngayon dahil nga nailagay sa public attention itong flood control scandal. Ngayon, meron ng marami na lalo na mga kabataan na mga sanay sa data analysis, data analytics, binabantayan na ngayon yung budget.
Tama.
At mismong pumupunta sa mga kung saan nandun yung mga project, meron silang nilaunch recently na tawag nila
CPA.
Hindi, bantay proyekto or something like that, no? Na i-identify kasi makukuha mo naman impormasyon na yun sa DPWH. Nasaan yung mga project na yan na supposedly ginagawa. O di mababantayan ng taong bayan. Ginagawa, talaga bang meron ito o ghost project ito? Talaga bang yung sinabi nilang 8 inches na kapal ng highway, talaga bang 8 inches? O sa gilid lang pala 8 inches, 4 inches lang sa gitna. So mga ganon, ang mga nababantayan ng taong bayan yan. So I think that's the way to do it. So it's everybody's responsibility to make sure we get good governance.
GMA was the last president who was an economist.
GMA and Pinoy.
Pinoy. Economist ba si Pinoy? Estudyante nga pala ni GMA si Pinoy.
Oo nga daw.
Kaya pala magaling si Pinoy.
Siyempre, tama. Magaling ang teacher.
Do you think the next president should also be an economist like you?
Well, not necessarily naman.
Or should you should run for president?
And then what quality, if you don't believe that it's an economist, what qualities should the next president possess?
Yes, sir.
Alam mo sa akin, isang one big C, character. Kasi kung ang isang pinuno ng ating bansa, tama ang kanyang ethics, ang kanyang character,
matino
at ang puso niya, matino ang pagkatao at ang puso niya talagang para sa bayan, para sa taong bayan. Kahit ano pang kakayahan niya, kung anong training niya, madali naman siyang pumili ng mga advisors eh. So, yung character din niya magde-determine kung paano siyang pipili ng kanyang kabinete, paano yung mga advisors na pakikinggan niya. Kasi alam naman natin, pag pangulo ka, lahat ng nasa paligid mo, gusto kang bigyan ng advice. So, in the end, ikaw pa rin ang pipili.
You know, before I say thank you, Abraham Lincoln has a very famous quote. You want to test a man's character, give him power.
Exactly.
Anyway.
So yun lang sa akin, qualification lang. We have to be a good judge of character.
Yes po.
It all boils down to that.
Pasensya na po, Manong Shell. Thank you for your time. Alam ko po, galing pa po kayo ng Laguna.
Sulit yun, sulit.
Sulit po para sa amin yung pagbisita nyo, biyahe nyo. Sana maulit po ito. So, maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo dito po sa aming programa, The Spokes.
Thank you.
Salamat din po.
Economic growth rates look good on paper, but people live in reality.
An economy is only strong if ordinary Filipinos feel it. Nani ang salud Braganza po.
Edwin Lacierda po, and we are
The Spokes.